Welcome to Melanated Rising, where we inspire, uplift, and ignite Black creatives, all while changing the narratives around Blackness. What does it mean to exist Black in this world today with our many intersections? That's exactly what we explore: the challenges, the beauty, and the brilliance. Every episode is a look at what is possible when Black creatives stand in our undeniable power. Hello. Welcome back for another episode of Melanated Rising. We're here for episode 15. I am your host, Kristen Iris. I'm an artist, a coach, and a speaker, specifically working to uplift and ignite Black creatives and help you create the impact that you are meant to have in the world. So we're back. I had a little break. It was unintentional. I apologize for not giving you guys a warning, but I did miss the last 2 weeks. I am currently in Maryland and working on a film called The Available Wife. So I am on the crew. We are working on this film, and I got here about 2 weeks ago, and it has been nonstop since I landed. So it has been impossible to record an episode, but I am here today and recording, so you guys will have something new in your ears. And today's topic is about choosing power over fear. Now, I cannot even believe this already, but my program From Oreo to Empowered has finished all of our coaching calls. So we are in the last week right now. We've done our last call. I'm watching my lovely clients just make so many changes and really step up big for themselves. And so this topic is inspired by some of the things that we talked about and changes that we made in the program, and also just some of the things that I saw in them. And I honestly, I'm like, where did all this time go? Like, it feels like just 2 weeks ago we were starting this 7-week journey, and now it's coming to a close. And I'm so proud of them. Like, I'm so proud of the changes that they've made and the work that they've been able to facilitate in doing this program. So if you're not familiar, From Oreo to Empowered is my program for Black creatives who were told that they were not Black enough in one way or another, and to break down the complex, the Oreo complex that creates for us, because it is a complex, and it creates a complex within us that is very, very deep rooted and impacts so many different areas of our lives, not just our creative work, but your relationships, your different endeavors, even just the way you relate to yourself, the way you relate to other Black people. And that was something that I was seeing was really impacting people. And I wanted to help people to heal that and really move from a place of fear and pain and this deep rooted hurt that was often not being faced, to a place of power and being able to really live fully who you are and really live fully the work that you're doing and the impact that you want to make. And part of that, a big part of that, is shifting from fear to power, which is why it's called From Oreo to Empowered. So the first thing I want to talk about when it comes to fear versus power is that it is a choice, and it is not, and it doesn't mean it's an easy choice, but it is a choice to make, that you go from operating from a place of fear and operating with fear controlling you, fear guiding you, fear driving you, versus operating from your power and your power over your life, your power to create change, your power, whatever your personal powers are, your superpowers, as I like to call them. Now, this is fear. Fear is something that everyone has to deal with, everybody. And power is an interesting thing, especially as people of the black creatives or people of the African diaspora, because systemically and historically and consistently, power has been forcefully taken away from us. It has been denied us, and This is not a matter of, oh, you create your own reality. That's not what I'm talking about. I mean, actually, systemically, power has been denied or refused or removed from us. Even looking at the education system in America, the school to prison pipeline, the justice system, looking at the mortgage, like the way mortgages are working, the way that they function, and the interest rates for white people versus black people, all different kinds of systems are built, at least in this country, are built with elevating one group of people, and in particular disempowering black people, disempowering a lot of people, but in particular black people. And so power is something that I think we have an interesting relationship to, and something that we may pursue, but we're almost pursuing it from a place of fear, which is not really power. It's like a false sense of power. So fear versus power in the microcosm of your own life is something that is a choice, but the influences of your sense of fear, your sense of power, is often, like, a lot of the influences come from the macrocosm of society, of culture, of, it might even be religion for you. It may be the, on a smaller scale, like your family and your family dynamic or the people around you, but the influences of the bigger world around you and the ways that systemic oppression and power dynamics come into play also will influence our personal sense of where we have power, where we don't have power, where we're operating from fear, where we don't think or realize we're operating from fear, but we actually are. And this is an area that I love to play in with my clients, because there's so many discoveries that they make about how they've been operating from fear that they didn't realize. So I want to share a little bit of story time, because I always like to do a little story time when I do solo episodes, and share how this has showed up in my life and the changes, the shifts that I have made. So I'll actually just even start with last year, 2018. 2018, oh my gosh, this was such an interesting year for me. It was a big transition year. I feel like 2017, 2018, and 2019 are big transition years for me. And that 2017 was a year of really trying to step out of the life that I was in, the life that I was living. Not that it was bad, but it just didn't fit anymore. Like, I wanted different things for myself. And so I was creating a lot of changes. I was stepping out and traveling the world. Um, but there was still these, like, strong-ish ties to community that I was part of that really didn't fit me anymore, that I was trying to separate from. And then 2018 was like that year that was a big change between the old life and the life that I am creating and living now. And then 2019, even though we're only 4 months in, three and a half really, this is totally different level of transition and change, in that I do feel like I have shifted out of what I was in before. Just my whole life in from 2017 before that is just very, very different from how it is now. But I'm still building and creating and moving into the things that I am wanting to have in my life and create in my life. So 2018, that middle year, that place between one and the other, um, felt like a lot of struggle. And it was a lot of struggle, but at the same time, it was me learning how to operate in that, not from struggle, and to kind of flow through, which is really, really challenging when things feel like a mess. So, to give you an idea of what was going on, 2018, pretty much the whole year, I was living with a friend in her second bedroom, and pretty much spent the first half of the year recovering from, like, a double whammy medical crises. So really two medical crises. Um, because at the end of 2017, I was in Bali in October, November. I was in Bali. I was at a workshop. I was like, yes, I'm traveling the world, um, and having serious health issues that were flaring up to the point where I had to fly back from Bali to Chicago and went straight from the airport to the emergency room and was in the hospital for 2 days and had surgery. So, big shift there. And it was awful. It was painful. I was completely miserable. I had a lot of really negative feelings, and then there was also depression in there as well, because who wants that situation to happen? So that's kind of what I was going off of going into 2018. That had just happened. I was still recovering, and still did not have a handle on the health issues that I was dealing with. So the first half of the year really was still kind of like recovering. I couldn't really work. I was still recovering. I was, you know, staying with my friend who was so generous in giving me a place to stay. And then the second half of the year was really a lot of like trying to manage the financial hole that I had basically tumbled into because of the medical crises. And that one that happened in November 2017 was actually the second, because a year before that, a year and a little bit more, a year and a quarter before that, I basically had a similar crisis. Um, Not quite to that same scale, but I basically had a similar crisis and a medical mystery that was going on, and also couldn't work at that time. So I spent the second half of 2018 like financially just like what do I do? Trying to build myself back up, which I'm still working on, because medical crisis can't when you can't work, and it just my goodness, it just really messes with a lot of things when you're in a place where you can't work and you can't support yourself, and you don't really have like that security, or like it's not like I had a huge savings or anything as security. So navigating that and still kind of navigating that, but 2018 felt like a lot of struggle through that. And there was so much fear around money. There was fear around what if I can't do this? What if I can't do that? There was fear around my health. There was fear around a lot of things, and even outside of the logistical things of what was going on in my life, there was also this fear around, well, if people know that I'm in this financial crisis, which I had really every reason to be in, it's not like I made a bunch of bad financial decisions. Like circumstances, led to my situation, that like, oh, they're going to think I'm like bad at my job, or like that they're going to make a judgment about me as a person. And it took me a while to kind of dissect that and even realize that that's where my head was. But in general, in our capitalistic society, we have a lot of judgments around money, and a lot of judgments around people based on how much money they do have, how much money they don't have, the financial decisions that they make. I mean, we judge rich people, we judge poor people, we judge people in the middle, like we judge everybody. And so I had a lot of fear around that as well. And I had to let that go, to be like, wait a minute, my finances do not actually determine anything about me as a human being, and my worthiness of success or happiness or security or safety or any of those things. So I had to dissect that, and that's something that you can do as well if any of this relates to you and you have feelings around money, around finances and where your finances are, and if you are actually kind of judging yourself based on that. Look at that and see where you can dissect some of that and shed those judgments that you're putting on yourself. So in any case, 2018 was a year that was very, very challenging. And I feel like part of that I spent struggling, and part of that I spent really trying to shift out of struggle mode, even though it was still really, really challenging. And that is a choice. And it is a difficult one because it involves some different elements, which I'll get to in a minute about how you do that. But the where I am now is, well, I'm in Maryland working on a film, which is a pretty big deal for me, because being in film and building my own film production company in the future is a big dream of mine. It is a big thing that I am working towards. I don't want to say dream, because I almost feel like dream is something that's too big or too lofty. I don't feel like it's a dream. I feel like it is just in my future. It is just something that I'm working towards that will happen. Um, but to have even that shift in mindset around the words like dream, or what it is that I'm seeing for myself and creating, and that itself is a shift from operating from fear and operating in power. Because while I do still feel fear, fear never goes away, to be honest. You're always going to have fears that come up. I don't let the fear control me. I don't operate from fear. I can recognize it, I can see it, I can understand where it's coming from, I can understand the lesson that it's got for me, what it is that it's showing me, but I don't operate from a place of fear. I operate from a place of power, from a place of what I want to create, what I want to do in my life, what I want to bring in, and moving towards that. So even though things still feel way in flux, I'm in big transitions and a lot of things are happening, I have more of a sense of ease and joy and trust in the process, and a sense of power. Now, for me, even now, like even from January 1st, the plan that I had for the year has already shifted. It shifted like within 2 months. And the things that I'm looking to do, I'm now going to be going about them in a little bit of a different way. And that being able to make that change is because I know what I want to create. I know what my mission is, and I move from, or pardon, I move towards what it is that I'm creating versus running away from what it was that I was in. And that's a shift in mindset. A lot of people, when I started coaching and I was doing like calls with people, they were kind of like intro calls or clarity calls with people to chat a little bit more about what they're struggling with, figuring out, where it is that they want to go and how we can work together, in my one-on-one program. So I was doing a lot of these calls. And one thing that I would always ask people on the call is, what is it that you want to create? Like, what is it that you want in your life? If you looked, 5 years in the future, or even 2 years in the future, like, what is it that you really want? And the responses that I kept getting was things like, well, I don't want to struggle with money. I don't want to feel blah, blah, blah. I don't want, don't want, don't want, don't want. Well, what you don't want is not the same thing as what you do want. And people are so focused. They were so focused on moving away from the things that they were unhappy about. They were so focused on what was making them dissatisfied with their life, that they didn't even know what they actually wanted. And how can you move towards something that feels fulfilling, that feels empowering, that feels um, beautiful and joyous for you, if you don't even know what that is? So we get so focused. People were getting so focused on the things that they didn't want, that when I said, okay, now we know what you don't want, but what do you want to create? Like, all those things are things that you don't want to feel, don't want to experience, don't want to have anymore. But what do you actually want? And a lot of times the answer was, wow, I really don't know, because I've been so focused on the things that are making me miserable. And that is a big part of shifting that operating from fear to operating from power. Because when you're in fear and you're running away from the things, or you're trying to move away from the things you're in, you're constantly looking behind you at what you have, or what you're in, or what you're experiencing, what you have experienced, and not wanting to do that anymore. Versus looking forward to, this is what's going to feel good, this is what's going to feel empowered, this is what's aligned with me, and this is where I want to go. And that's a huge difference. And it's it's a huge difference, even though it's subtle. And it's something that a lot of people don't even notice. And that's something to ask yourself, what do you really want? And if you've got a lot of don'ts and negatives and focusing on the stuff that you want to change versus focusing on the things, on the actual change itself, or the things you want to create, then you're operating from a place of moving away, which a lot of times means you're operating fear. You're afraid that these things will continue. You're afraid that you're going to be stressed. You're afraid that you're going to struggle with money. You're afraid that people won't like you. You're afraid of blah 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 blah. And that's what you don't want to feel. But when you move into power, it's I am creating this. I am moving towards this. I want this. And you're looking at what you are bringing into your life. And that is powerful. So, in the context of my last year and really my last 2 years, and this being the third of what I kind of feel is this big transition. But to be honest, you're kind of always in transition. This is what I'm learning in my 30s is I'm always in transition. I'm always in process. I'm always changing. And I can appreciate that and I can love that now. Whereas 10 years ago, I would have by this time want to have arrived in some way, like have an established life, and then that's how things will always be, and that's totally not how I see things now. It's like I always see that things are going to be changing and shifting, and that I get to have some control over that change. You don't get to control everything. Okay, I didn't get to control that I had a medical crisis. You don't always get to control. You don't get to control when people die. You don't get to control necessarily different like circumstances or things that happen to you, but you do get to control the way you respond to that. And you also get to control the way you choose to operate in the world, the way you choose to respond to people, the way you choose to interact and engage with others, with your creative work, with yourself, and with everything else in your world. You get to choose that. And there's a lot of power in that. So, if we take it back, let's back it up a little bit, and I tell you about my life before 2017. I was still operating from fear. I was still operating from fear. The sort of relationship I was in with my ex, that was fear based. It was an emotionally abusive relationship, and I was in it because I was afraid. Okay, taking that relationship out of it, the things that I was pursuing, I can even bring it to when I started shifting into teaching yoga and doing body work, which I love doing. I've shifted out of it because I hate the yoga industry. Um, but moving into doing that work, I was like, yeah, this feels good. I don't want to work an office job. But did you hear what I just said? I don't want to work an office job. I don't. It's the negative, it's the what I wanted to move away from, and that's okay. But there was also an element of, but what I want to create is, so there was an element of the negative, but there was an element of the positive of what I want to create is being able to do work that I like, being able to do work where I can have control over my schedule, more control over my schedule. Little did I know how yoga works. But being able to do work where I could also write, where I wasn't bogged down. But again, there's that negative where I wasn't bogged down by a 9 to 5 or a corporate environment. Um, Being able to do work where I can write, where I can pursue other things and have a little more control over my schedule. And one thing that I really wanted to do was travel. But even in that, there was, yes, this is what I want. Yes, this is what I'm creating. But there was an element in there of fear of what if this doesn't happen? What if I work really hard, but it doesn't work out? And that element was still kind of a driving force for me. It was okay, I have to work harder. I have to do this. I have to do that. I have to make this happen so that I'm not stuck, because I was feeling kind of stuck in a lot of ways. And it's like I have to do this so that I don't feel stuck anymore. And so even though I love doing it and I was passionate about it, and I was passionate about helping people, and honestly, yoga is the things that I learned in yoga is a huge part of what I bring into my coaching. The lessons that I bring in, the tools that I bring in, the explorations, the deep personal exploration, these are things that I learned to do on my mat that I've taken off my mat and I bring into my coaching. And then a bunch of other stuff as well. But I loved it, but there was still a driving force in there of fear of staying stuck where I was versus I really, really, really want this other beautiful thing that I'm creating. So both elements were in there, but there was still that driving force of this underlying fear. And then laced in with that was this fear of, what if this doesn't work? What if I don't make enough? What if I can't sustain myself? What if I can't do my writing? What if I can't travel? What if blah 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 blah? All of these things were laced in there. And so even with that, there was still an element of fear that I was operating from, and this trying to rush away from where I was. And so, as much as I have pursued different things and dreams, goals, different endeavors, I feel like there has often been an element of fear in there. So, let's take it out of the context of career. Okay. And I will talk about in boxing and athletics. So, and this is a quick one because I actually realized this fairly early on and like put the like just cut that one right off. I mean, I love boxing, and 7 years ago I was in the Golden Gloves, the Chicago Golden Gloves, fighting, and it was my first competition, first boxing, like first like real uh, boxing match that was outside of my martial arts school, and I loved it. I mean, it was so hard. It was so grueling. And I love boxing and I love martial arts because it is one of the ways that has pushed me through fears. It has helped me navigate fear, it has helped me explore what fears that I have. Um, and with boxing, as I started pursuing boxing and started going into that training season, there was oh, I love this and I want to go to the Olympics one day because the Olympics at that point boxing women's boxing had just been added to the Olympics. So I was like, yeah, I was so pumped. I was like, yeah, I want to go to the Olympics for boxing. And in all honesty, that was not about me pushing myself. That was not about me wanting to take myself to the next level. There was an element of that. That was really about wanting to prove myself to other people. And that's how I tended to go about things, is let me take it to the highest level I can, because once I do that, nobody will be able to deny that I'm extraordinary. Nobody will be able to tell me that I'm not good when I'm in the Olympics. Nobody will be able to tell me that I don't know what I'm talking about when I'm expert level education in whatever it is. And that same thing was playing out in boxing. And it didn't last long because it sometimes soon after that, I want to say like within 6 months or so, I realized that this is a thing that I do. I try to take things to the highest level, not because I actually want to achieve the highest level. I mean, it's some things I do, but a lot of the things that I had pursued, I wanted to take it to the highest level because that meant that my expertise or my knowledge or my skill or my talent would be, quote, undeniable, which is not true. I mean, look at Serena Williams, and people still say that people still want to talk shit about her as an athlete. I don't understand how, because like the proof is just in her entire career, but whatever. Um, so what I'm saying is that I was operating from this place of fear that people wouldn't see me, that people wouldn't see my talent, they wouldn't see my skill, they wouldn't see my knowledge. And that is a deep rooted story for me. And when I realized that that was a deep rooted story, that was where I realized, oh, this is why I want to go to the Olympics. This is why I want to do this thing. It's not because I'm pursuing excellence. It's because I have this fear that people aren't really going to see me. So that was where I made a big shift there. Okay, I'm not going to operate from fear. I'm going to operate from power. And power means that I'm doing things and I'm pursuing things because I really want to pursue them. So that was a huge moment for me. Now, how do you look at let's talk about, for you, things to explore. How do you even look at the ways that you're operating? Now, if you're listening to this, you might even have already pinpointed places where you're like, oh, that's definitely fear. I definitely operate from fear. I definitely operate from running away from what I'm in, or I operate from, I have to do this because X, Y, and Z, or expectation, or whatever. But here are some ways that you can actually look at this. Now, the first thing is looking at how you respond to challenges that show up in your life. Okay, so difficulties, things that are struggles. How do you respond to that? And I mean, not just the actions that you take, I mean, physically in your body. Like, what is your emotional response? How does your body feel? Now, as I'm saying this, I'm thinking about for myself when I respond when there's a challenge. It's I like I can already feel it in my gut, and I'm not even having a challenge right now. I'm just recording this podcast. Like, I feel it in my gut. My solar plexus is like this knot, this lurch, and that for me is a fear response. And I know that because I have looked at my fear responses. I know what they are, my physical fear responses. But look at how you respond to when a challenge comes up. Do you complain? Do you find all the reasons why it's terrible? Do you find all the reasons why X, Y, and Z won't work? Do you go into problem solving mode? Do you look at the bright side? There's so many different responses that you can have, but just start to look at the ways you respond to challenge. And if those responses are linked to deeper fears or even surface fears, or if your response is coming from a place of power or empowerment, or um, something else that might be positive for you. Can't necessarily think of other examples, but something else that might be positive. But look at the way that you respond to challenge, the feelings that you have, and then also the actions that you take. Some people complain for like the first day, and then they're like, okay, let me just fix this. And then they get into problem solving mode. Some people go into their hidey hole and isolate themselves, and part of that, I actually know someone who does that. Part of that is because they're afraid of showing weakness to other people. They don't feel like they can rely on other people, or like they're allowed to rely on other people. And that has to do with fear. That has to do with fear of how you're going to look. That has to do with fear that people won't be there for you because you think you're not enough for people to show up, or you're not worthy for people to show up. So, and that's just one example. Do you immediately go and start talking to people and say, hey, this is what's going on, you got any ideas, or this is my idea for how to fix this because this is the challenge or the struggle I'm in, what do you think? There's all kinds of responses. So that's one thing that you can do, and that's going to help you look at how you actually operate in the world. The next thing is, how do you respond to joy? Do you embrace it? Do you let yourself bask in it when something good happens? Or do you go into worry mode of, oh no, what if this isn't real? What if this goes away? What if this gets ruined? How do you respond to joy? That's another really good way to look at how you are choosing to operate in the world, the ways that you are responding to the things that happen to you. Challenge, joy. The other way is to look at how you engage with people. How do you engage with your friends? How do you engage with your family? How do you engage with strangers? And this is a really interesting one. And I talked about this on my last solo episode about imposter syndrome. Is that a lot of times, especially as Black people, where our worth is determined by, literally by our worth as a human being, our worthiness of life was literally determined by our usefulness to other people, how much work we could put in. Is that traces through the generations to today. Okay, and so for Black people in particular, the way we engage with others is can be very influenced by the social, cultural, and historical context in which we have been brought up. So when it comes to friends and family, For example, Black women in particular, who are often the people that are relied on to hold the family together, to hold the community together, to take care of everybody, is are you responding from a place of, okay, I have to take care of everyone, I have to sacrifice myself, I'm not allowed to put my needs first? And a that will give you an indication. That's an example, but that gives you an indication of how you're choosing to operate in the world. And there are other ways. Like I said, that's just one example, but are you a people pleaser? Do you have strong boundaries? Do you let people push boundaries? Are there certain people you let push boundaries? Are there ways that you use your voice with people? Are there ways that you silence your voice with people? All of these things are indications of how you engage with others, how that is very different depending on the people that you're engaging with. And that is very much so an exploration and a demonstration of how you choose to operate in the world. And when you look at that, where you're speaking up, where you're being silent, that itself can be a demonstration of where you're operating from fear or where you're operating from power. Okay, the ways that you engage, the ways that you interact, all of those things will show you where you might be having fear, where you may be operating from fear versus where you feel really comfortable. And there can be a lot of comparison. So, this is why looking at how you engage with people can be so informative, because it can vary depending on the people. And the ways that you may feel empowered with some people can be such a contrast from the ways you feel disempowered when you're engaging with others. And that contrast is really great to look at in, like, wow, I feel totally different with this person versus like, oh, this person, when I'm around them, I feel like this, or I feel small, or I feel um, challenged by them. And I don't want to feel that way. So, what is different in how I operate with these people versus how I operate with these people? And that could be a really great guide for you. So, looking at those three things: how you respond to challenge, how you respond to joy, and how you engage with various people in your world. These are great ways that will show you how you are operating and where you're operating from fear. Now, understanding your fears and your self sabotaging behaviors is like a key element to this whole shift. Because if you don't even know the ways that fear creeps up, if you don't know the ways that you respond to fear or what your deeper fears are, it's challenging to shift the way that you operate. And I say that because there are things that don't look like sabotage, that don't look like you're operating from fear, when you really are. And it takes actually exploring and digging into your fears to see, oh, this is actually me operating from fear. This is not me operating from power, or this is not me just making a logical decision. Um, so, as an example, let me try and think of an example here for you. um, as an example, and actually I gave this in my group. One of the things is, let's say you're like, okay, I'm going to create a writing habit, a writing practice. Okay, and I use this example because I used it in my program, because I had two writers that were in there and that was their creative project. So let's say you're like, all right, I'm going to establish this writing practice. And then you start getting into it, you start really working on your writing project, and then somebody comes along and they're like, "Oh my god, I need you to do X, Y, and Z. I need help. I need help with this." And there's nothing wrong with helping people. You're like, "Okay, I'll help you." But what you do is, the first thing on the chopping block to make space for helping this person is you cut out your creative project. Now you're cutting into your writing time. Um, you're just like, okay, I'm just going to shove that to the side because this person needs help. Again, there's nothing wrong with helping people. I help people. I love helping people. That's where my work is. But what we can do is we start making excuses for shoving the other things that we want to be doing aside for other things. Now, this was just an example helping people. It might be something else, but the writing in this example does not have to be sacrificed. It does not have to be sacrificed on the altar of helping someone else. It could just be you change your time around. Okay, maybe you prioritize your time different. Maybe you schedule it differently. Maybe you put boundaries around the ways that you're going to help this person, the time that you're going to give to that, so that it's not completely taking over your life. Maybe you'll change the boundaries around your writing time so that you're still getting that in, you're still doing it, but maybe you're doing it a different time of day. So instead of just completely sacrificing. So it's one of those things. It's just as an example of the ways that it looks like you're doing something good, and it looks like you're doing something helpful, and you are, but you're also sabotaging the other thing that you're working from. And the reason I bring this up in the context of fear is because something that we don't realize is that when it comes to work that is pushing our boundaries or pushing us forward or that we're really passionate about, in this example of sacrificing it to help someone else, that can sometimes in a grander underlying way have to do with fear. In that, okay, as I'm pushing the boundaries of this writing project, this other thing is coming up. And even though I don't have to sacrifice this, I'm going to. Why? You don't have to, but you're choosing to. And the choosing to has nothing to do with helping the other person. It has nothing to do with that. It has to do with an underlying fear of what's changing and what's shaping, what's opening up for you as you do this project. And that underlying fear is like, well, let me pull you back into the comfort of where we were before. So subtle things that you may not realize are sabotage. Now, this came up in my group as well. Is we did like a 7-day challenge where they set themselves up a task that they were doing every day, and one day came up where one of my clients in the group did something that was kind of related to the work that they're doing, but was not actually what they had committed to doing. And they use that as like the thing they were doing that day as like, oh yes, I accomplished, like this is related to the task, so I count this as a task. And it's like, but that's not actually the task that you committed to. And so you've talked yourself into the ways that this other thing is related, the ways that this other thing is still accomplishing what you were talking about when it's actually not. And that happens in other ways. I can actually use writing as an example, but let's use business as an example. So I know we have some business owners who listen. So let's say you're like, okay, every day I'm going to do this in my business. Um, every day I'm going to reach out to another podcast and propose that I be interviewed on that podcast. All right, and then one day, so you're every day you're reaching out to a podcast, reaching out to a podcast. Just an example. And then one day you're like, okay, well, let me just research. Let me listen to some different podcasts, which you should be doing. But like, let me get in some podcast groups on Facebook, and let me just kind of see what people are saying and the advice that they have. That's all great, but that's not the same thing as reaching out to a podcast. It's good work, but it's not the same thing as what you committed to. And if you're having fear around reaching out to these different podcasts, to making these different connections, then you find this other activity that pulls you away from the thing that you're afraid of, which is actually making contact. And it's okay, let me putz around in these groups and do some research. Not that that's bad work, but that's not the same work. And pulling away from the actual contacting people is based in fear. It's not based in power. It's based in, oh, this feels a little uncomfortable, so let me go do this other thing. But this other thing is so adjacent, it counts. It doesn't count. It doesn't count. It's different. So if you don't actually know that you have fears around contacting people, fears around, there's so many different fears that can play into why you would pull back from that. Fears around not being good enough, not being expert enough, not being whatever, in that example of podcast connections. Then if you don't actually know what those underlying and those deeper fears are, you're not even going to see that you just sabotaged yourself, that you just acted from fear instead of from power. You're not even going to see that you pulled yourself back from the thing that you were pursuing because you don't realize that that deeper fear is there. So you have to understand what your deeper fears are. And that means at looking below the surface. For example, people talk about, well, I have a fear of failure. What the fuck does that mean? Fear of failure doesn't mean anything. Failure is subjective. What does failure mean to you? What will failure say about you as a person? What will failure mean for your life? That's what you're afraid of. But if you're just like, oh, I'm afraid of failure, that's not a real fear. You're not really digging into it. You have to ask questions of yourself. What would this mean? Where did this come from? Where did I learn this? And that's where you'll start to peel away the layers to your fears. And that's where you'll start to see how you've been responding from fear and the self-sabotaging behaviors that you have been exhibiting up until this point. And when you see that, you will see some of the patterns of how you've been choosing to operate, how some of the actions you've been taking have been based in fear, even though you may think they're based in power or in desire or in the impact that you want to make. You'll start to see the connection. And when you see that connection, now you get to choose something else. Okay, so again, understanding your fears, peeling away the layers to your fears, and then seeing the ways that you implement sabotaging behaviors, disempowering patterns and actions, behaviors that you didn't even recognize before. That's the way you've been operating. So now you get to choose something new. You get to choose, well, if this is operating from fear, what would it look like if I was operating from power? And you have to actually think about it. There's an exercise we did in my program, which I'm not going to talk you through the whole exercise right now because there's just not enough time for it. But looking at, okay, this is how I've been operating. What would it look like if I operated from power? How would I behave? How would I respond to challenges? How would I respond to joy? How would I interact with people? What kind of boundaries would I establish? And looking at those things, and some of those things, those actions, those behaviors, those things that you're like, yeah, if I was in power, I would do this. Those will feel, a lot of them, they may feel really good to do, but they also may feel challenging because you're not used to it. You're literally creating a new way of operating in your world. And that takes adjustment. It takes being really active and aware of how you move through the world and making a choice to move through the world in a different way. So when you understand the way you've been operating, your patterns, your fears, how you've been responding, now you can look at that and say, okay, well, in these situations, this is what I'm going to do. This is how I will, instead of doing this, I will do this. Instead of, instead of running away or being quiet, I will either end the conversation or I will speak up. See, some of these things can be challenging. Speaking up can feel really challenging if you haven't been. Speaking up can feel challenging when you have been, to be honest. So you get to choose, okay, this is how I've been operating. It's disempowering. This is what I'm going to do instead. And you can actually write these things out. This is how I'll respond. These are the boundaries I will establish. This is how I will maintain those boundaries. This is how I will enforce those boundaries when someone pushes them. You're making a choice in how you will actually navigate your life, how you will move through the world, how you will make decisions, how you will even think. You can even start changing the way you think. If you have these sabotaging thoughts or these berating thoughts, you can choose, catch yourself in the moment and be like, you know what, that's not helpful for me. And then start actually thinking other things in its place. So this is such a powerful thing because it puts the control back in your hands. like I said, you can't control everything. You can't control all of your circumstances. You can control some of them. You can't, sometimes shit just happens. You can't control necessarily the way people are, you can't control necessarily the way people are going to think about you or the way that they will initially treat you, but you can choose how you respond. If you don't like the way someone's treating you, you can tell them, you can choose not to engage with them anymore. It doesn't mean you have to take their behavior all the time, you know? So we have a lot more choice in the way we navigate the world. And again, this is on the microcosm of your individual world, your individual experience, your relationships. But as Black people, that is still heavily, it is still often influenced by the greater world around us, the systemic oppressions, history, social cultural norms. And with that, this is why this work is actually so important. Because these things get so ingrained in us from so young, because these conditionings, these ideas, these really methods of survival are ingrained in us so young, we have to work harder to change the way we've been operating. We have to work harder to go from fear into power because of the world around us. But it doesn't mean it can't be done. We can do it. It just means you have to be more conscious, you have to be more aware, and you have to really be active about making the choice and really be active about understanding what your internalized oppressions are, what you have done to really operate from survival in the world, what your fears actually are, and choose how to navigate your life and your relationships and the world and even your creative work or other endeavors, choosing how to navigate that in a way that feels empowering for you. It means more awareness on our part. And that's actually a really good thing because that awareness that we have of our influences, of our conditionings, and changing that, it means that we are setting a foundation for creating that not only within ourselves individually, within the community, within the greater collective, within society, and then within the world. And that is the ripple effect of when we start to choose power and operating from power over operating from fear. So I hope that this has been helpful for you. And I would love to hear what you're getting from this, what lessons you took, what key things stuck out at you. If you enjoyed this show, make sure that you subscribe so you get new episodes, and please rate and review in iTunes or wherever you listen. It is the best way to help others find us and to get this show out to more ears so that more people of the Black diaspora can be empowered. So if you'd like to help support this podcast, I invite you to join my Patreon page at patreon.com/melanatedrising. I am a solo podcast producer, so you're joining my Patreon and contributing will help to offset some of the costs and really help to support me so that I can keep producing this podcast for you and bringing in other guests as well. So thank you so much for tuning into this episode of Melanated Rising. Always remember to stand in your Black creative power.